morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm delighted this morning to be able to share a virtual stage with Mike and really hand over the reins to him for the majority to talk about the great work that we've been privileged to be involved in. That he'll show you that he's been doing at Sainsbury's around this really exciting topic of the digital estate. I'm going to give you the briefest of introductions for those of you who haven't sit on the previous calls about ourselves. I've personally, and many of us here, have been involved and really seen a passion for over 20 years of trying to help our customers make sense of this sort of increasing anarchy and chaos of the unmanaged information we find ourselves with on a daily basis, and make some sense of that, moving us to far more structured information that can be used throughout the life cycle of project delivery and asset management. Now, in terms of the areas that we work in, well, again, we're privileged to work really across the board. We're not just tied to public. We work also, of course, for the private sector with Michael talking today. But we have very much what my colleague would call a 360-degree view of the world, in that we work both for those who are supplying assets to clients, and indeed for clients themselves who are receiving information from suppliers and need to be able to communicate what is required and then manage the delivery of that in a structured way. And I think this gives us a very unique insight across all of the challenges from both sides of the fence, that's really allowed us, and me particularly from a point of view of being the custodian of the product, to understand the challenges and hopefully provide solutions for those customers. And just so that you can see the breadth of those customers, many names there I'm sure will be familiar to you, from our first customer nationwide. We've then grown across the board in those areas of both suppliers and asset owners that I mentioned there. Now, I'm going to give a brief introduction to hopefully set the scene, and then, as I say, I'm going to hand over the reins to Michael. And we're talking about digital estates, but before we talk about digital estates, let's say what we mean by what is increasingly known as a digital twin, or what we're really trying to do here in general. Historically, we would have happily continued delivering projects, delivering assets through projects, and then those assets have an ongoing life cycle. And all of the challenges that we've tried to address over the last few years and ongoing is about making it so that now, rather than just simply deliver a physical asset at the same time we deliver that physical asset or do a project on that physical asset, we actually focus equal emphasis on delivering a virtual equivalent of that asset. And that's what we mean by a digital twin. And we can see here a real example from just one of our customers, Wienerberger. Some of you may recognize this as the E4 house, but at the same time as you have a physical template house being delivered, you have, through that process, the virtual equivalent being built, so that it can be used early on in decision-making processes to decide things, engaging with the client around makes and models of equipment, paint colors, and so on. But even then, going through to, as information is installed and is captured on site, being able to record dates around when those components need to be serviced, where all the manuals are, and so on, and moving forwards to have very much connected assets where we know what we set out to do, we've then done, and we can actually measure the operational state of that asset and use it to see how well we did, and depending on how well that was, feed that back and do better next time. So it's very much about driving improvements through the life cycle. And of course, it's not just buildings. I haven't yet mentioned the word BIM, but it's a word which a lot of people still get confused about, and we really see this whole thing as just it's information management, and this is about helping our clients on a digital transformation journey, whether that's dealing with linear assets like roads and rail, whether it's dealing with utilities, or whether indeed it is dealing with buildings. And I think particularly a topic of today is around that this is by no means just about trying to make sense of information that is newly built. There are many, the majority of assets out there are existing assets, and it's how you capture and make sense of that existing asset information so that you can use it to make decisions here and now. And this is a wonderful project here, which in fact we had two 16-year-old students. We challenged them with creating a retrospective model of our office, and they came up with some fantastic work. And I think ultimately, I mentioned this on another webinar, so I won't go into too much detail, but if two 16-year-olds can really get enthused and grab the concept of moving towards digitizing what we do, then hopefully there's hope. But as well as it being about all of that, it is of course not just about assets in isolation. It's about entire estates. It's about being able to capture information at a portfolio level in a standardized way so that we can then make sense of it all and use that to make better better decisions around consistent information. And that's what it's about. It's about being able to make decisions. We must remember that all of this is being done ultimately because someone at some point in the life cycle is going to have some question, is going to have a decision they need to make, and they want to be able to make that as quickly as possible. And the more we can get to this position of having not just communicated the need for a physical, but communicated the need for that information to make those decisions, then we can surface that up in the simplest way. As you can see here, an example, I was privileged to be at a conference where this was presented yesterday from Mackley, where they are connecting the information within their common data environment to maps, so they can provide one-click access to that information, not all of which is only made possible through digitizing that data in a structured way. And the kinds of questions are questions across the life cycle and indeed through into operations. And we're really talking about moving towards this trio of data of capturing not just documentation but also data, but that everything being done in a spatially coordinated way. And in order for it to be suitable for decision making, and of course, we have to be able to apply these tests to it, and this is then derives what we need in terms of systems. So it must be current. If it's out of date, which is part of the challenge at the moment, then what happens is people would just go off and create it again, resurveying or what have you. But also I have to trust who produces it. I have to know that it comes from a reliable source. And of course, if it's not available and they can't use it, then it doesn't matter how good and how current it is. I'm still no better than I was before. So all of this is not just about being able to capture information. It, of course, is about being able to keep that information up to date. And we'll end up with the digital assets. And many people would think of, if you mention BIM or you mention digital or you mention such like, they'll say, oh, well, that's a model, sitting like that. But actually, there's a whole host of questions that I simply can't answer if all I'm doing is focusing on that information that I've captured in my project. There's a whole load of questions, and it's all about questions I still can't answer, and that's where it's about recognizing that this is just one part of an overall connected set of information. And in this particular example, the questions are answered by geospatial data, which is out there, and indeed which it is possible to bring that in and unite that to build up that information source. But I know one of the things that Michael will emphasise is how this is not necessarily about trying to put everything in one system, but it's about trying to make sense by linking those things together. So it is not just communicating out a need, capturing, but it's also about connecting it with other information, whether indeed that's with models or, as is the case, some of you will have seen this before with Thames Water, where there isn't a model in sight, that there's still a need to be able to make sense of project and asset information in the form of documentation, being able to connect that through simple mapping interfaces with other data out there, just to make better, more informed decisions more quickly. And before I hand over to Mike, therefore, I think this picture produced by colleagues at PCSG, I'm sure many of you will have seen this, is very, very clear that this is a process where we are talking about the delivery of information that starts life with a project, gets delivered through design and construction, and then of course ultimately in operation. But there are multiple systems which might be involved, but ultimately it gets delivered to a customer's asset needs into their client CDE, where it can then be both kept up to date, maintained, and connected therefore to their other systems, so they can use it to make decisions. And that is what we see as the vision of the digital estate, and the topic that we're going to talk about today. And on that now, I'm going to pass the floor across to Michael, who is going to really flesh out in their specific case study what all that means. So thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks, Steve. Okay.
Right, looking good, Michael.
Okay, brilliant. So I'm going to take you through the Sainsbury's digital estate program and what it means. Okay, so before I get onto the program, just a bit about me. So my name's Michael Barber. I'm the Property Systems Development Manager at Sainsbury's. I've been at Sainsbury's for about 11.5 years. Massively into my VW campers. So I brought one about 7 years ago, which was a bit of a sorry state when I got it, and I spent more money than I will ever tell my wife restoring it. And I'm also a very keen cyclist. Okay, so what we're going to go through. So I'm going to give you an overview of what is digital estate for Sainsbury's, the challenges that we faced, how we then have delivered that over the last 2.5 years, how we've then had to develop our information, how we developed our systems to support the business challenges we faced, and then what did we need to put in place from a BAU point of view to make sure that we protected and maintained all of this stuff that we're doing. So before we go into the detail, I'm just going to show you a short video just to explain what is digital estate and what does it mean for us.
At Sainsbury's, understanding our estate portfolio has never been so important to us. The focus of our property team has changed from the delivery of hundreds of large projects to thousands of smaller interventions in our existing estate. This increase has put pressure on our current processes and systems. It's also generating more and more information, which then needs to be found and used. This information is required for lots of reasons: to assess the viability of projects, deliver projects, manage the estate, and for statutory compliance. Imagine a household garage where you store lots of different useful items. These grow over time. Items are thrown in randomly, and eventually it's difficult to find what you're looking for. Information about our estate has built up in a similar way. Today, our estate is extensive and diverse, containing over 3,000 sites. Supermarkets, Argos, Habitat, petrol stations, offices, depots, residential apartments, land, and even a duck pond. Each element in our estate has a lot of information associated with it, plans, documents and data held in lots of systems. For example, just one of our current systems stores over 1.5 million plans and documents. This information increases every time we change a property. If information is not properly stored, protected and maintained, over time it will become like our messy garage. During our day-to-day operations, we constantly need to answer questions about our estate. How much, where is, which stores, who is, and so on. Although we have loads of data about our sites, locating the information we need can prove challenging. Sometimes it's hard to find information we need to make decisions. Sometimes we cannot be sure that information is accurate, up-to-date and complete. The time taken to collate information from different places can prove frustrating. As a result, there's a general reliance on colleague and third-party knowledge of the estate. We need to improve this situation whilst continuing to deliver projects and manage the estate. Our Digital Estate programme will enable colleagues and partners to answer questions, gain insight and find information quickly, accurately, completely, through better information management and continued systems development. It's not just about new and improved IT platforms. Just as important to its success is changing our approach to information. This includes using common information standards, for example, file naming conventions and classification systems. These codes help us search for and identify the documents we need. Protecting information quality through governance, ownership and accountability, colleague and partner engagement and training. All our work is aligned to UK and international standards, using best-in-class systems and prioritised by business need. Digital Estate will be an important cultural change for our colleagues and partners beyond IT systems. It will bring the importance of information management to centre stage. Our digitalised estate is not just about improving the now, it's also about being resilient and well positioned for the future. Our vision: to enable colleagues and partners to answer questions, gain insight and find information quickly, accurately and completely.
Okay, so that's a really high-level overview around what we were trying to achieve. And just to touch on, so what is digital estate and what do we see it as? It is an enabler. It will enable our colleagues and partners to answer questions, gain insight and find information. And these are our kind of key measures around, we want to be able to do it quickly and we want to be able to be confident in the information so we know it's accurate, and we want it to be complete. We want to make sure we've got all the information we need to answer the plain language questions that we want to ask. And we're doing that through better management and continued development of our information and systems. So that's an overview of what we're after. What were the challenges that we faced and how did this start? So the first bit that came to mind was the whole information challenge and the problem that we've now got around the 21st century. And it's a good problem to have, but how do we deal with that? So back in 1870, we had one store, everything was on paper, and actually we didn't have this challenge. We could find stuff, we knew where it was, we had designated people, and all they were doing constantly was looking after our own information. And the big challenge came in probably the early 2000s, where we got this this new thing, the personal computer, and where it was so easy to capture information, where we then start capturing so much, but at the time, the amount of resource that we put behind it to look after and protect that information reduced. And now we're in a world where we've got cloud computing and big data and Internet of Things, and we've got so much data, we don't know what to do with it. And our estate has grown massively from the one store we had, and with the introduction of Argos and Habitat, to over 2,500 assets. And the way that we invest in our estate has changed massively as well. So we used to build a store, 5 years later we'd do a minor refurbishment, we might touch it and do a bit of a initiative or an innovation, and then we might do a couple more before we touch our store in another 10 years' time. We're now constantly doing changes and rolling things out and trying to adapt to our customers' needs to give them things ASAP. And that's resulted in the problem around how do we keep track of the information that we generate as part of this, and how do we make sure that we can find things. And we've got this kind of information explosion at the moment where it was, we need help and we need to look at how we can answer questions quickly. So this was our original aspiration, where we need to be able to answer questions on how much have we got, how much does it cost us, how big is it, which stores have what features in it, who's responsible for maintaining stuff, and when does stuff expire. So it all started with some really simple plain language questions. And then we had this challenge where we've got a large technology stack, and information isn't siloed all in, or isn't stored in one place. It's siloed in lots and lots of different locations. So we've got loads of data. We relied heavily on our colleagues and our third parties, and when we tried to find things through that technology stack, it would take us a long time, which would result in additional cost, waste on time, potential risk, and potential loss of opportunity. So it was slow, it was incomplete, and it was inaccurate. So we use that technology stack and our information stack on our BAU needs to do our standard day jobs and our BAU functions, for enterprise reporting across our estate to understand what we've got, and some statutory reporting and compliance. And then there's this need on the other side around constant insight. So this is where we're trying to drive ourselves forward as a business. We're exploring ideas. We're constantly asking these questions around, so what have we got? Where are they? How much? Is it utilised properly? And that ultimately is driving innovation and defines and develops our investment programme and where we're going to spend our money to give us the best financial return. And traditionally, it was slow, is incomplete and inaccurate. It would take a long time to work its way through our stack. And that, for us, is digital estate. It's not a single system. It's a collection of the information that we need as a business to answer these plain language questions so we can drive ourselves forward. And our aim is to align that stack. And we didn't go into this with the aim of we're going to replace every single system we got and we're going to overhaul it with one area. We recognise that different systems are actually good at what they do within their areas, but there's a challenge that when a system holds some information and the system holds some more information, we need all of that collated together. We need to be able to pass them questions through our technology stack and our different teams across property as quickly as possible to enable us to answer these business challenges at an acceptable rate. And our aspiration, and I mentioned it before, is that we can do that quickly, we can do it accurately, we can do it completely. And that takes us back to the vision that I've mentioned a couple of times already. So that was the challenge that we were trying to achieve and the ultimate vision that we want. So how have we delivered that? And I wouldn't say we've done everything yet. We're on a journey. We're probably 2.5 years into that journey. And it started off very much that we, as a company, had heard this term BIM about 6-7 years ago. And it was all about how do we get to a point where we can start building all of our new stores and our extensions and our major investments in 3D, so we can get some really intelligent models that will tell us everything we need. And quite quickly we realised that, okay, that's great for everything we do new, but we've got an estate of 2,500 things that are all in 2D, and the way that we are now investing our capital has changed quite considerably, where we're not just investing in new stores, extensions or refurbishments. We're looking at how do we utilise the existing space we've got to really maximise on our existing assets. So we started off talking to lots of different individuals to understand, well, actually, before we try and reinvent the wheel, and let's talk to people that have already done this, and let's get some subject matter experts in to understand actually how have others done it and how are the government doing it in the world of BIM. So I spoke to lots and lots of different companies, and in the end, went with a company called PCSG, led by Mark Bew, and the guy underneath is a guy called Mark Stodgill, who's been my main contact. And then the rest of the team has supported me on my digital estate journey and Sainsbury's digital estate journey to understand what are we trying to achieve and what infrastructure do we need to put in place to protect and maintain our information. And as part of that, we did an overhaul of our BIM standards, and the word BIM for us and the way the business looked at BIM traditionally was all about BIM is 3D models. And Mike, why the business is doing what was branded as BIM, can you go off and look at a project which at the time was branded digitising the estate to look at what do we do with everything else that BIM isn't going to solve? And quite quickly, after talking to PCSG, we realised that actually this concept of BIM isn't 3D. It's about the importance of information and better information management, not have you got a 3D model that's got loads and loads of data in, because we realised that actually our BIM model didn't give us everything we need. And with the way that the retail sector's gone, we're not building lots and lots of new stores. We debranded the word BIM quite quickly. So as far as Sainsbury's is concerned, we don't do BIM anymore. We do a project called Digital Estate. But for those of you that really understand what BIM should be, they're the same thing. And then we did lots and lots of listening with our colleagues. So we did loads and loads of discovery to understand what are the challenges that we face as a business. So rather than traditionally, we went in and said, we need 3D models, let's build everything in 3D, and let's collect as much data as possible. We stepped back a bit and said, well, actually, what are the plain language questions and what are the challenges that our colleagues face? And then let's prioritize that to deliver the business needs based on what's going to give us either the biggest financial return or the biggest benefit to colleagues. Because a lot of this isn't just about the capital return we get, it's how can we make our colleagues more efficient to enable them to do their jobs. And the output of that was lots and lots of case studies. So as we walked around the different teams, we found the challenges they had around whether it was our program team and how they capture governance around papers, or our section 106 payment reclaims, where we're entitled to a reclaim based on the council having spent some money for some highway works that we were expected to be done as part of that. All of that kind of stuff were opportunities that we were missing out on, where actually if we got to the point where we could trust our information, or if it was more readily accessible, that we could see a real business benefit. And this is just one example around solar panels. So Sainsbury's have got probably one of the biggest solar estates across our stores. And 4.5 years ago, we were in London. We moved from London to on the outskirts of Coventry to Anstey Park, and all that information around what PVs were installed, where they were installed, all the maintenance and that were all supplied to us on either CD or paper copies. As part of the move, got relocated somewhere, and they're probably sitting in some iron mountain somewhere. But ultimately, we lost them and we couldn't find them. So we did a big exercise about 2.5 years ago, recapturing that information through our externals and getting their support. And then about a year and a bit ago, we had an internal restructure. And the guy that captured all that information put it on his personal OneDrive. So he had it all readily available. And the second someone wanted to know about it, they knew who to contact. Unfortunately, as part of the restructure, he moved on, and we nearly lost it again. Luckily, one of our colleagues was searching through his information before they left and managed to find it in his OneDrive and capture it and take it off before we potentially lost that information again. So the output of that is we've developed 3 work streams, and I'm going to walk you through each of these. But the first one is around we need to develop our information, and we need to know that we've got the information we need to answer the plain language questions to enable us to run the business. We need to develop in our systems to make sure they do what we need them to do. And we need to manage our existing information and systems to ensure that anything we capture, we can protect and maintain it. And I've been quite strict with my teams to say, look, if we cannot protect and maintain, why are we spending the money in capturing it? And that was probably the biggest change that we had, where before it was let's capture everything. But if we can't protect and maintain it, my challenge has always been, well, what's the point? So let's step through each of these. So we'll kick off with information development. And that all started with one of the things we recognised quite quickly with this aspiration to connect systems and to connect data sets is everything's set up slightly different. We've got different hierarchies, we had different ways of storing information, and there wasn't a standard key and a standard way to align our information sets. So the big piece of work we did right at the start, before we even got too much into how we were going to host it and what systems we were going to look after it, we looked at, well, what is our information hierarchy? And for those of you that know Cody, this is loosely aligned with it when you get into the levels and spaces and rooms. So this is how it sits for Sainsbury's. We break ourselves into zones, which is as simple as North, Midlands, South. Each of them are then broken up into regions. Within a region, we've got a location, and that's where our legal entities align around our rates and rents, etc. And a location is a collection of what we brand as assets. And an asset can be a building, and whether that's a trading building or a non-trading asset we own, like a property, or it could be a piece of land, like a car park, or it could be a piece of land that we're going to future build on. And then on them assets, we have occupancies. So whether that's a supermarket, a convenience, a petrol station, car park, a store sports centre, a depot, Argos habitat, or within that concessions, maybe vacant areas, or our non-operational estate. And then once you step into an occupancy, we break it down into levels, around ground floor, mezzanine, into individual rooms and spaces, which group together we classify as areas. And then within them we have individual components, and then we have different component types, which we then classify, which we'll go on to. We've put an equipment classification in place. So the example here is if I turned around to my daughter and said, go pick me up some GIF, before it changed its name to SIF, potentially she'd come back with two very different products. And that's very much the same in our world. If I turned around and said to one of our planners, okay guys, we're building this room, put me a table in it, they want to know what kind of table. Is it a prep table? Is it an office table? What's it used for? And we have a standard classification that sits across all of our components that defines what it is. And if we wanted to then look at, okay, based on a classification, I want to understand all of a particular type of chair we've got across our estate, we can do it at a classification level, not just at an individual component level. Then we wanted to standardize our levels. We realized quite quickly that actually it was different depending on the consultant we were using. And we traditionally used to call our sales floor ground floor, but in this example, or what if it's in a shopping centre and actually you're already on the 3rd or 4th floor, or you've got a store on stilts and you've got a car park underneath. What does that mean? So we've aligned it to say actually the base level is 0, 0, and then as you go up it's level 1, 2, 3, and it doesn't matter what's on that level. And when we then start codifying drawings, you can pinpoint and understand where everything is within that building. With the naming convention, and this is aligned to the 1192 naming convention. We've done something slightly different at the start around project code, where we can concatenate a program number and an individual building number. But other than that, the rest of it's the same. So we've got an originator for if we're in our project area, or the person that's ultimately accountable for that drawing if we're in our existing estate or our aim area, division, level, type, role, and then a unique number. And we've done something slightly different where we've said, actually, we've got some key documents that are, we want them to be consistent numbers across our whole estate. So every store plan or every architect's building shell is exactly the same number across every single project. And we've used the CISFB classification for non-key documents within our project world. And then we've taken the standard 1192 workflows and the concept of work in progress, shared, published, and archived, and aligned them into our project space and the PIN space and the asset space and aim space, and look at how do we get from this work in progress area, which will be on, we don't hold work in progress on our central systems. We leave our external consultants to manage their own WIP areas and their personal space. But the second it moves into shared and then ultimately into published, that's in our current CDE. And then there was a big challenge around how do we land this new culture to our colleagues and ensure we engage them. And the bit we found easy was telling them this is what's in it for the business. And everyone knows about my garage metaphor around what we're trying to achieve. And I quite often use the example of, I know if I sent my wife out now and said, go get me my hammer, she wouldn't have a Scooby where to get it. Well, I know exactly where I've put it. Or actually, if I had a shadow board and it's always in the same place and I asked her, it's probably more likely that she would come back with the right tool. And it's exactly the same for these guys. And understanding what's in it for the business is the easy part. The bit that we've probably found more challenging is what's in it for them. Why should they spend the time putting it away in the right place so that the next person that comes and finds it, which potentially isn't them, can find it? And that's probably the hardest challenge we faced, getting colleagues to understand why they need to do it, what's in it for them. And this was, we've done a massive cultural change where we've said we expect people to name drawing documents this way. We expect it to change the way you're working to align with these standards. And it's taken us a long time. And we still have challenges now where we find that some areas aren't where they need to be. And the way we're getting around that at the moment is constant audit. And we've put quite a lot of resource and time in to protecting and maintaining, to making sure that people are doing what they need to do, and then turning it back on them so they understand the why and what's in it for them. So that's quite a high level overview around information and standards and what we had to put in place. Then we looked at, and a lot of this was done in parallel, but system development. And we started off with what are the seeds of digital estate? What do we actually need? So we broke it down into 3 areas. We need a filing cabinet, somewhere to store our drawings and documents, that we can find things quite easily. Using the new naming conventions, we can make it, and going back to the what's in it for them, I wanted a system where I could ultimately, on my homepage, chuck it in, and it programmatically locates documents based on their naming convention. And that's exactly what we've developed. We need a database. We want somewhere where we can understand what we've got in our existing portfolio. So we know what, I don't know, store features are in there, how much does the store take, how big is it, and then right down to the individual components. So I can look at, okay, within, I don't know, across our estate for all our supermarkets, how big are all of our general offices and what equipment have they got inside them. And then the last bit was a process manager. So what do we need, when do we need it, and who's accountable for? So that's the what, the when, and the who. So ultimately we selected GroupBC after a probably about an 18-month review for all the different CDEs are out there, and nobody could deliver everything we wanted because Mike had quite challenging requirements. But we've constantly developed and built upon, and I'll talk later about some of the other aspirational things that we're doing with BC as a company. But the bit that I've really really enjoyed is we've been able to develop and build on the product to meet some very specific needs that ultimately didn't exist when we started this journey. So if we go back 18 months ago, the project space was in a really good place. Everyone was managing projects well. This whole concept of AIM and your existing estate wasn't where it needed to be, and we did a hell of a lot of work with BC over a period of nearly a year, looking at how do we get from project and PIM into asset and AIM, where we can then protect and maintain our information. So we've got one space where we can go to which holds our existing estate information, and we can be confident in the credibility of it. And then we can start answering some really plain language questions around what have we got, how big is it, and what's in there. So tell me every store that's got a pizza counter. So we've now got a common data environment, which is my garage. I've got a set of rules and some new standards, which is kind of me storage, my house rules in my garage. And then we've got this culture challenge where we need to make sure that everything that goes into my garage is being laid out like it is on the right and not like it is on the left. So what did we do? And I'm going to take you through the process that we went through. So we started off with a system called StoreSpace. So this is a bolt-on to AutoCAD, and this is solely in our 2D world. We do the equivalent in 3D, but not on the same level, based on we were only doing our new stores and extensions, and our pipeline slowed down on new stores. But on our existing estate, we're constantly developing and driving it forward. So we use a product called StoreSpace, and StoreSpace draws our store plans. It's a bolt into AutoCAD, and it standardizes our information and makes sure that we're using a defined set of components, that our layering structure, the polygons that we draw within the drawings are all on the right layer and the right color, and it basically gives us structured information. We did a big old cleansing exercise where we went through and cleaned up our information to make sure that within our documents and our AutoCAD drawings, that the correct table had been used, correct chair, etc., cabinets, gondolas. And as part of that, we reviewed all of our petrol stations, our convenience stores or supermarkets, and then ultimately when we brought Argos in, we've done a similar exercise. We have a system called Specs and Standards, which is supplied by a company called Icon, and in that we've got a list of all the individual components that could be found on our fit out models. So these are all our gondolas, chairs, tables, etc. And each unique type has an individual data sheet, has an individual block, and then blocks are now across all of our estate drawings. They're all aligned with the new classification to make sure that we can then classify and search of that. And we've got a set of validation tools in place. And these validation tools will control the quality of our information. So this is a one of our convenience stores. And we have the ability to, there's a button at the top, which is a validation tool, to color by spec, to make sure that everything we draw on our drawings is the right equipment. So if it's not colored in, like the ATM at the front of the store, we don't recognize it, at which point the guys would have to delete that and add in a correct block. But then we color code it based on what's the current specification, is it currently under review, or is it obsolete? Yeah, then we looked at our system called One Place. So One Place is we use Salesforce as a platform CRM system. It holds our national database of stores. It tracks what we think our competitors are doing, and it also manages our investment program. And all of these are interlinked with to each other. And we brought in our level around assets and locations, and we brought in all of our supermarkets, all of our convenience stores, our petrol stations, our store support centres and depots, and then our Argos estate. And then we've got One Property. So One Property is our instance of BC. we launched our existing estate first. So I wanted to get that right before we jumped into projects, which were already being managed quite well within our existing systems, just without the standard or standardization across our information set. So we launched our existing estate and our AIM space on the 7th of November 2016, and we launched our project space on the 17th of April 2017. We put on all of our drawings. We've then, from then, been able to pull out the classifications. So our one property system is linked to our specs and standards system via an API that BC and Icon have supplied. And that has given us the capability to start running reports across our estate, so we can start to understand, well, what have we got? And this is really high level how it works. So we've got the blue box on the left-hand side. We use store space and AutoCAD to draw our plans. We've got store space in the top corner that we use to standardize the things that go on plans to make sure that we're putting the right rooms on, the right sizes. There's a set of validation tools that will check to make sure that nothing's wrong, so that the user that's inputting that information is getting it right at source. It talks to specs and standards, so the tool set I showed you previously that's got the toolbar across, they'll place the equipments in and they'll drag and drop their custom service desk, their gondola, their equipment, and then they'll again run the validation tools to make sure that the information is what it needs to be before we upload it. It's all then renamed in line with the naming convention, so that when it gets uploaded to BC and our system branded as one property, it knows what it is. So we've got the capability to chuck 100 drawings at our homepage that could all be named different things, and the system will read the name, and based on the way we've set our naming convention up, it knows exactly where to file it. So you could upload 100 documents all in different, or that would sit in different folders or spaces across the system, and it will file them programmatically in the right space, which again goes back to what's in it for your users. We can then go back to the guys and say, look, if you do it this way, it will save you some of the laborious tasks the guys used to do, where they would have to navigate to each space or each project and file things individually. It knows where to put it based on the naming convention. So it goes into BC as well as your native files like DWGs and your PDFs, and any Word or Excel documents. The DXF, or an IFC if you're working in 3D, gets uploaded into the system and information gets extracted from it. And that ultimately populates an equipment and area database. And from that, we can then start pulling some really basic and simple reports from it. So that gives you an overview of kind of the system development we've done. And from a business as usual, it was quite simple what we were trying to achieve, but quite challenging to actually do it. So ultimately, we did a big cleansing exercise. We got to a place where our information was in a good place. We'd invested in our systems and got to the point where actually we could start answering some of these questions. What did we need to do to make sure we protect and maintain that, so that we don't end up where we traditionally were, where actually we didn't trust our information, that we had to rely on our third parties. So how do we get to the point where we keep that information where it needs to be? And a lot of it came down to audits. So we've now put a designated team in place which constantly audit the information we want to protect and maintain. And we realized quite quickly that based on the sheer volume of stuff that we were trying to capture, it just wasn't financially practical to protect and maintain anything, or sorry, to protect and maintain everything. So we looked at actually what's important to us as a business, and that's what we're going to focus on. And we found, since we've put these audits in place, that we're constantly kind of shifting through. We'll focus on one area, and we'll then drive the quality of that area up, at which point, after 3 or 4 months of maintaining that area once it's got to a good base, we found that was quite steady. And then we've moved the team onto a different area to focus, driven that up, still gone back and looked at some of the previous areas we've done. But actually, because we've embedded that behavioural change and that cultural change across our consultants, that it not dropped down as much as it was previously. So we've got our audit team focusing on the areas that we need confidence in to ensure that actually we can protect and maintain the information we need. I'm just going to finish off with a short overview that BC produced around what does one property do, just to show you the system.
Now all the latest store information is available in a few clicks. You can quickly and easily search for stores or assets. You can go straight to the key documents, such as the store plan in various formats, such as DWG, IFC or PDF, all now securely available to team members online. Each file version is controlled so the team know they're looking at the latest version to find out what assets it contains and how much space it occupies. 2D drawings were digitized and asset information added, and that information extracted as data into BC when it's uploaded. BC smoothly integrates with Sainsbury's existing systems, some of which they've used for 15 years and didn't want to replace. This ensures information isn't duplicated and prone to errors, but seamlessly synchronized. Files are easy to add by dragging and dropping them, tagged with relevant information, much of which is automatically pulled from the file name. These tags contain information such as the originating company, the zonal level, and its role, all making it easier to find by other users. Save and issue, documents and drawings can be sent to other users for approval or comment, ensuring any feedback is stored with that version. Now investigating where your assets are and how many you've got is simple. For instance, here we're looking to see if a store features as a particular type of pizza counter. It's also easy to set up reports to search across the whole estate for similar pizza counters or assets, again saving valuable resources on searching or surveying and ensuring the team has the latest information to work with. With one property, Sainsbury's can now answer plain language questions about the whole estate quickly and easily, and from one location.
So that's it for me. So hopefully you've enjoyed the overview of what Sainsbury's digital estate is and what it means to us. And Steve, I'm guessing back over to you unless there's any questions.
Thank you very much. That was an exceptionally interesting presentation, Michael. I hope all our other attendees also found it equally so. We now have just some brief time for a Q&A session. I think if I just look at the questions that have come in, one which I think shows people were listening earlier, which is good. What other information do you plan to capture or connect to in the digital estate in future? For example, do you see value in connecting geospatial information as was shown earlier?
Yeah, so one of the things we're looking at the moment, we're in a good place from a drawing a document, the GIS world. So I sit within the property data analytics team within the property division, and probably 70% of the team that I work with are GIS analysts. And one of the big challenges that the guys have at the moment is we've got access to lots and lots of geospatial location, and every one of our assets within our database is already geospatially located. We just don't push that through into our drawing, or we don't currently push that through into our drawings and document systems. It is one of the things I'm really quite keen on. So one of the big challenges that we still face is traditionally people are used to navigating through kind of a Windows Explorer system where you have folders within folders within folders. And we've tried to take them away for that. So every one of our assets is one giant bucket. And then we use the naming convention to filter by metadata. And that bit, the feedback we've had is working really well. The challenge we're still getting is if we take, and let's take Tamworth, for instance, as an example, we've actually got 3 stores across our estate that have got the word Tamworth in. And actually, knowing, am I picking the right store, I think this is where spatial information, seeing things on a map, will be really beneficial. So one of the bits that we will be working on over the next 6 to 12 months is that every one of our spaces that's already geolocated will be brought into BC to have a geospatial location that you can then ultimately navigate through your information via a map and look at, actually, not only do I want to know the existing asset on Tamworth, and it will show you the 3 spaces on Tamworth and where they're located into a map, but actually I want to click on that space and I want the existing documents, or I want or to understand what investments are happening on that space. And then based on them investments, and let's say we're putting a pizza counter into that store, will now tell me everywhere else that's putting a pizza counter, and that you can click on that program of works, and then it represents the things that you're working on across that program on a map, which then helps our construction teams look at, well, how are we going to phase this based on where all of our work's going to happen, and actually how are we going to allocate work to our external consultants based on where the workload is within our zones and regions. So yeah, I see probably one of the biggest focuses we're looking at, as well as developing our construction information, is going to be around how do we bring GIS and BIM together.
That's fantastic. Obviously, everyone's been just in awe from the presentation because we're getting a whole load of questions through. We've really only got time for one more, I think. So I'll be fair and pick at random. So how about equipment remote control? So remote monitoring readings. Is it centralized, and somehow are you looking at how you might connect that to BIM models?
Yeah. To be honest, it's still quite, as far as linking it to BIM and models, I don't think we've got enough. One of the biggest challenges we've had with this whole digital estate stuff is we are only what we traditionally classed as BIMing stores, which basically means building a 3D model on new stores and extensions. We've got an estate of over 2,500 things at the moment, and probably only about 150 3D models, maybe a bit more. So my biggest driver at the moment is not so much how do you connect it to 3D, is how do you answer the business questions you need to through 2D and information. And based on the fact that our whole estate is in 2D, and we've reviewed the costs of moving everything to 3D, we can't yet see a financial benefit in moving everything across. So as long as, and I'd go back to one of the bits I said right at the start, as long as you understand the plain language questions you need to answer, and if one of them is, well, actually, I need to be able to remote monitor. So we've got a project where we look at remote monitoring and how can we answer questions around, I don't know, let's pick energy use for electricity, and based on the cost of electricity, we want to understand how our stores are utilising that space, or if we've got a particular spike in a store, how do we deal with that? We don't need a 3D model to be able to articulate or to understand the problem and then solve it and go tell someone to either, I don't know, there's an issue, so we need to send our FM colleagues down because for some reason the weather in that area of the country is really, really hot, but the heating bill is ridiculously high, there's something wrong. We don't need a 3D model to tell us that. So our focus and why we've, as a business, debranded the word BIM, because it's, at the moment, this is within Sainsbury's, and from some other people I spoke to, this seems to be a common theme. People see BIM as 3D, and it's not in my head. It's about information and having the information you need to enable you to do either your role or the business need. And my personal opinion is you don't need a 3D model to do that. I can see benefits in 3D models, but currently, within the things we're doing, I don't need 3D to achieve it. But that doesn't mean that it hasn't got a place in some areas.
I think that's a great note to end on, and I completely agree that ultimately it's all about the value of the information and it's having some level of spatial relationship, but it doesn't need to be that means that that's a 3D model. We have a whole host of other questions, and really sorry we couldn't answer everyone else's, but we will log those questions, and hopefully we'll, if Mike is willing, try to get the answers back to those other questions. So I'm just going to thank everyone again for attending and for hanging on for an extra 3 minutes. Hopefully you've enjoyed today. We actually do welcome feedback if you have or if you haven't. By all means, if you're sufficiently interested in knowing more about what you've seen today or speaking to us, then you can, of course, go to our site and request both the demo or other such. And we, for those of you who haven't listened to our previous webinars, we do maintain those webinars on our website. So we would welcome you to go and have a look and hopefully learn a bit more about what we've been doing, but more important, what our customers have been doing with what we've been giving to them. So just I want to once again thank Mike for his time. I've certainly enjoyed that tremendously, and hope that you all have too, and thank you.